We'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 today. If you need a Bible to follow along, there's one in the hymn rack in front of you, and we'll be on page 479 of the front section, the Old Testament of that Bible in the hymn rack. If you have yours, I encourage you to open it up and follow along with us, because what we say and what we try to say each week as we preach is exactly what God has said through His Word. We've been on a pretty good journey with Solomon so far in Ecclesiastes. Most scholars speculate that Solomon's an older man when he's writing Ecclesiastes. He's been around the block a few times, you might say. While Proverbs, which he also wrote, seems to be positive and upbeat and kind of more optimistic, that if you just do the right thing, good things result, and good results are going to naturally occur. Ecclesiastes takes a more kind of down-to-earth or a sensible approach to life. That's a bit more caustic, a bit more cynical. Solomon is, frankly, kind of a jerk. He's walking around popping people's balloons, okay? But he's taking his optimism from earlier in his life at Proverbs, and he's asking, does it really work that way, though? Does it really actually look like that? Proverbs is kind of about general rules, but Ecclesiastes is looking into the exceptions to those rules. So Solomon, now older and wiser, he's going to test the things that he's seen against the wisdom that he espoused early on in his life. But why would he do that? What makes him question whether or not that wisdom is going to work? Well, he tells us in chapter 1. And he says in chapter 1 that things don't really ever change. You see, wisdom is about changing things, right? It's about if you do it a different way, things will change. And Solomon, now having lived some life, looks at what's going on around him and goes, well, water still falls from the sky and then somehow gets back to it and falls again. And so there's that. And, that mountain's going to be around for a whole long time, and it doesn't really care how I live, and that doesn't really change anything about the earth. So things don't seem to really ever change. Time marches onward, and nothing really seems to get better. It doesn't really get worse either. It just is. So is there actually any meaning to life? I mean, Proverbs assumes there is, but by the time Solomon's seen more of life now, he's not so sure that there is. And so he's questioning, he's putting to the test whether or not this is actually a thing. Does wisdom actually matter? And does it give purpose to life? And so he tests this idea of meaning or change in various laboratories. He starts with possessions. I mean, this is an obvious one, right? If I have more stuff, that's going to bring purpose to life, right? Because I have it. A nice house, a nice garden, servants and slaves and comforts and entertainments and pleasure. Well, Solomon's conclusion was that was completely empty. There was nothing there. And so he tested wisdom. And again, there's another obvious one. Solomon's already argued effectively for it in Proverbs, so he brings it to the test. And he concludes wisdom is absolutely better than folly. But it doesn't really bring a whole lot of benefit by the end of life because you die. And so it doesn't really change anything about that. So it's too kind of empty. It's nice, but ultimately it's kind of empty. And he talks about work, the prestige, or the position, or the legacy that a man can provide in his career. But when one dies, all of it goes to someone else, and who knows what the guy who gets it's going to do with it. So that's empty. And if nothing else is going to satisfy, then maybe justice will do it for us, right? At least bad guys get what's coming to them, right? Well, wrong. And this one takes Solomon to a really dark place. He says, if doing what's right doesn't actually result in blessing, and doing evil doesn't actually result in punishment, then why am I even alive? If we're going to talk about justice, giving meaning to life, Solomon's conclusion is that too is completely empty. There's no meaning to be found there. And throughout his study, Solomon's running up against the same things that make him come to these conclusions that all of these things are empty. Time never seems to change anything. In fact, given time, even if we were to change something, it would resort back to the way it was in the first place, because that's what seems to happen. He also recognizes that there's a randomness to life. There's seasons for everything under the sun, but they're not ours to control. We have no say over when it's time for peace and when it's time for war. We have no say over when it's time to be sad and when it's time to be happy. And no matter how hard we push on those sad times, we can't make them happy until happy times come. And last of all, ultimately, Solomon realizes that death comes for all men. And it levels the playing field. Nothing you do in this life can do anything about changing that. And therefore, nothing that you do in this life really has purpose or meaning. And so Solomon looks at, well, if that's the reality, maybe there's something that at least is kind of a sedative for me to take, something that might make life better than it is. Is there anything that makes life better? We talked about this last week. He offers two things: friendship, relationships, real relationships with people around you do seem to make life under the sun better, because two are better than one. And he also notes that a right relationship with God, one that recognizes God for who he is and responds correctly to that in humility and obedience, that's also going to make life a little bit better under the sun. And Solomon has one more for us to look at today of something that might make life better under the sun. But to be honest, it's not really actually one more. It's actually the one thing that when we apply it to everything else, changes how we see and experience life under the sun. It's the attitude or the value system that will help us be in the right place to properly enjoy our relationships with both humans and God. But first, he's going to need to dispel a couple faulty saviors before we get there. And the first faulty savior, the first one that isn't going to make life better under the sun that he's going to deal with today, is political power. Let's look at chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. He says, if you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, don't be shocked at the sight. For one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. It would seem that a solution to injustice, especially, would be to seize the systems of power in the world and make them work for what's right. If we could just get the right person, the right party, the right ideology to control injustice, inequality and demonization would be done with, right? I mean, that makes sense. It would only seem the way to correct injustice is to replace those who dole out bad justice in the first place. But Solomon has a problem with that solution. And his problem with power is simple. His problem with power is that corruption is to be expected. He says, if you see the oppression of the poor and the denial of justice and righteousness in the land, don't be shocked by it. It's to be expected. Now, some of the details of what Solomon's saying here are a little hard to parse out, but this is the clear part. This is clearly what he's making the point of. Don't be shocked by corruption and scandal within the halls of government, because it's normal. It's a basic human nature to watch out for your own. And so, whether Solomon's saying that officials watch each other's backs so that they can let corruption slide, or it's some form of Solomon saying, well, this guy's looking out to make sure that guy doesn't have corruption. This guy's looking out to making sure that guy doesn't have corruption. They're all watching each other, but who watches the watchman? Ultimately, Solomon's point is that those who are in positions of power will abuse it. And before you think that you'd not abuse that power, or that your friend who's running for office wouldn't abuse it, Solomon, by simply saying, don't be shocked by this, is saying something very clear. No matter who's in charge, your party or the other guys, it won't be any different. I mean, it's really easy to say, It won't be like that with my guy or with me in place. Interesting enough, I was reading, it was a fiction book I was reading recently, and in it there's a group of men who have experienced some of the worst injustice possible. They've somehow offended or upset people that are in charge, and they've been placed in this group within the army whose sole job is to be cannon fodder. They're not given armor, they're not given any sort of protection. They're sent out in front of the rest of the army so that they can die while the soldiers can fight without being killed because the enemy's attacking these guys. I mean, it's the worst possible injustice. And they're having a conversation about who's in charge and what's that's like. And one of the characters, who's kind of a traveling storyteller, asks the question to the rest of them, if you could join the ranks of the powerful, would you? And one of the men's answer is, I would join them in a heartbeat. If I were in charge, things would change. Those who are in charge, they would work the mines and the fields. They would be the ones who would take the enemy fire. And the rejoinder was this: it's been my experience that no matter where you go, you'll find those who abuse their power. If you're to overthrow those in power and place yourself in power, I doubt that the world would be much different. The abuses would still happen, just to someone else. And this is why you and I shouldn't put too much hope in what marks we make on our ballots this week. Now, don't get me wrong. Vote. Vote with principles. Vote with God's word in mind. Vote for life. Vote for freedom. Vote for the well-being of those around you. Absolutely do it. But don't hope a whole lot in it. We vote for those things, knowing that there's no perfect candidate. There's no perfect bill. There's no perfect platform. There's no perfect ballot measure. I mean, on a federal level, we have a speaker in the House, a third to the line to the president, who's willing to speak about God and the Bible, who's willing to declare his allegiance publicly to that, and praise the Lord for that. But even if the offices higher than his were filled with the same kind of people, it's highly unlikely there would be any kind of change in our nation. Our national morality might rise, sure. Our regard for and respect for the things of God might go up as a whole, sure. But the answer to injustice and sin isn't societal reform, though it's certainly preferable to the alternative. The answer to injustice, sin, and the dissatisfaction of life is a new heart. It's new humanity through the work of Christ on the cross. And that is one of the key differences for us as Christians. We use the ballot box. We use pregnancy centers. We use adoption agencies and battered women's shelters and food banks to help address injustice and oppression in the world. But ultimately, we know those things are not solutions. They only help alleviate the problems. They cannot solve them. Those problems are rooted in sin, and only the work of Christ on the cross answers that problem. If you'd like to understand more about how Christ answers sin and injustice, I'd love to meet you down at the front here at the end of the service and talk with you about it. My point is this: we cannot possibly hope to vote in the kingdom of God. Why? Well, number one, that's not how it works. God was very clear about that. But number two, as Solomon's noting here, no matter who is in power, they will abuse it in some way. And that shouldn't surprise us. So, why don't we just burn the whole thing down, right? Why do we even have government in the first place? I mean, this is the question of the French Revolution, right? If all the ruling class is going to do to oppress us, why have a ruling class at all? Let's take off their heads, we'll level the playing field, and assume everyone will then treat everyone correctly the way they're supposed to. But here's where the problem with power actually comes in. It's not that corruption is actually expected. The problem is that problem with power is not necessarily that corruption is commonplace. It's that we're stuck with it. Corruption, unfortunately, is better than no one in power. Again, what Solomon's saying here in these verses is really hard to translate in a way that seems to make sense. So we're kind of making some assumptions here to try and find out where Solomon's going. But it seems like what Solomon is saying is that even if government is unsurprisingly a corrupt place, some sort of government is better than none. At least someone then is overseeing the advancement of the nation, even if it's for corrupt and selfish reasons. It seems like Solomon's actually saying tyranny is better than anarchy, which to us is just absolutely crazy. But history seems to actually bear this out. I mean, before you think that Solomon's saying this just because he's a king and he's trying to protect his office, let's see, does this actually work in the annals of history? And I think it does. During the French Revolution that I mentioned, for about a year, there was a period known as the Reign of Terror. And at this point in the revolution, the monarchy had been abolished, and not one but two republics now had been established. One had fallen and a second one was there, but that hadn't satisfied the masses. And so partly out of desperation, partly out of the need of the leaders of the republic, partly out of the need of the leaders of the republic to stay safe, they handed over the leadership to a group of common citizens called the Committee of Public Safety. And ostensibly, the republic was still in charge, yet they were effectively dissolved. And so essentially, what happened during this year period was anarchy. Everyone in France was literally doing whatever they felt like, whatever was right in their own eyes. And in the course of that year, 17,000 people were executed without trial. 10,000 people died while in prison. And the vast majority of those 27,000 people who died did so that someone could settle a personal score. It wasn't political. It wasn't economic. There wasn't any other advantage. It was pure personal score settling. I don't like that guy, and so I'm going to have him executed. But the violence wasn't the only issue. During this year, France's economy, which was already wildly depressed, tanked. Almost nobody was working. There was a dramatic rise in the poor and the disenfranchised. Nearly 30,000 may have died for political reasons or for personal scores, but in the hundreds of thousands died from starvation, neglect, and poverty. Finally, having enough of the chaos and violence of this anarchy, another government called the Directory abolished the Committee of Public Safety, executed its leaders, and installed itself as the new ruling party in France. It was wildly corrupt. But almost immediately, the violence and the chaos of the Reign of Terror ended, and the economy and trade began to tick upwards. And frankly, the Directory was replaced by a guy named Napoleon Bonaparte, who was a tyrant of his own kind, and in his tyranny actually ushered in what France would see as a golden age in their history, as a tyrant. History bears this out. What Solomon is saying is absolutely true. Tyranny is better than anarchy. And the problem with power is that we're stuck with corrupt versions of government who offer us no hope and no way out. We simply have to put up with it. We have to take the bad with the good. And so we can't put any hope in politics or power to right the wrongs in society and to make life under the sun better. At the best, it can only maintain the status quo. It can't really make things better. So Solomon decides to turn to another false savior: money. I mean, and this seems a common answer to all sorts of evil and injustice, right? We just throw some more money at it, and maybe it'll fix. And sometimes it seems to work. But Solomon in verse 17 reveals the end to a pursuit of wealth and riches. He says you live. That's symbolized by the eating that he's talking about in verse 17. In darkness, with great vexation, sickness, and anger. It's not like Solomon's just saying that the pursuit of riches might possibly make you unhappy. I mean, he's pretty grim. No one wants a life that's described as dark, vexing, sickening, and angry. No one wants that. There's nothing attractive about it. There's nothing redeeming about it. There's nothing hopeful or happy about that kind of life. Perhaps Charles Dickens captured it best in his description of Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. Describing Scrooge at the very beginning of the story, he says, "Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel has ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster." You want that to be on your tombstone? Frankly, as the story progresses, Scrooge meets several spirits, the last of which shows him how others would respond when he dies. One group of men Scrooge sees discusses his wake with callous attitudes, one even saying, I'm only going to attend if they serve a good lunch. And he sees another group of household servants who've plundered his things. And they spend pages mocking his loneliness and misery. In spite of Scrooge's vast wealth, he's not happy. He's not glad. His existence is one of darkness, vexation, sickness, and anger. How does riches and how does wealth get you here? Where does this come from? I mean, all of our common sense tells us that wealth should bring us joy. Riches should satisfy, right? I mean, it removes all the obstacles in life. Those who are rich don't have the problems that other people do. So why would someone with such deep pockets have such despair? Well, Solomon's really clear in letting us know where that despair or where the darkness of deep pockets come from. And he describes it in verses 10 down through 17. He says this, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. So what is the advantage to their owners except to look on? The sleep of the working man's pleasant, whether he eats little or much. But the full stomach of the rich man does not allow him to sleep. There's a grievous evil which I've seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. And when those riches were lost through a bad investment and he fathered a son, there was nothing to support him. As he came naked from his mother's womb, so will he return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry with his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Exactly as a man is born, thus will he die. So what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? Throughout his life, he also eats in darkness with great vexation, sickness, and anger." Well, Solomon says that darkness of deep pockets comes from several places. Number one, it comes from the inability to satisfy. Wealth is incapable of satisfying. I mean, perhaps because he already discussed work and the fruit of our labor at length in chapter 2, Solomon doesn't really elaborate much on this point other than saying money won't satisfy, it doesn't work. I mean, he's already noted the emptiness of working your entire life to build a fortune only to leave it behind when you die. He's also already noted that those who inherit that fortune won't know what to do with it. Maybe Solomon has experienced the continued desire for wealth that accumulating wealth stirs up. I mean, John D. Rockefeller is well known, one of America's great tycoons, is well known for responding to the simple question, how much more money do you need, with just a little bit more. A man who should have been satisfied with what he had. Either way, Solomon is noting that our fallen, selfish mind will constantly think that we don't have enough. We're insatiable, like Scrooge, grasping and clutching and covetous. We're constantly pursuing something that can never deliver, And so it'll make us mean. It'll make us biting. It'll make us grumpy. Pleasure or money can't satisfy. But a second thing that Solomon says is that it attracts dependents. Wealth attracts them. Solomon knows that those who are rich tend to attract those in need. And the needy don't look for help amongst themselves. Why would they? Why would you look to someone who doesn't have anything to help you who don't have anything, right? They're going to go to those who have had. There's a reason why the popular progressive battle cry right now is tax the rich. Why? Because if we tax the poor, we're not going to get anything. They don't have anything to tax. But it's not just those who are looking to take your money, it's those who legitimately need it that he's talking about too. I mean, the average cost for raising a child right now is around $250,000 from birth to 18. I mean, that's a lot of cash. And parents, no matter how many times they draw on the wall, that kid draws on the wall, you can't not feed them. You can't not clothe them. You got to give them a room to sleep in. Or those of you who have aging or ailing parents, this is another kind of dependent. The housekeeping, assisted living, doctor's visits, mobility modifications, and more all cost money and time, and frankly, time is money. But you should honor your parents and do your best to do well by them. I mean, there's other dependents, right? What about our brothers and sisters in Christ who are in our church who find themselves in financial need? Christ commands us to care for those people. And the early church gives us an example of how that was done. The richer members would sell things or provide finances for those who were in need inside the church. Those hangers-on, those looking for handouts, and those who are dependent, both good and bad, on your wealth, that group's only going to grow as your wealth grows. The larger your business, the more employees you have to pay, and the more you have to provide benefits for. The larger your home, the more food that needs to be in the fridge, and the more heat and electricity and water you'll consume. The greater your riches, the greater your responsibility to do good with them. Instead of solving problems, Solomon's saying riches actually create problems. They create them. Not only that, there's a lack of peace. Wealth disturbs your personal peace. Now, there's a couple different ways to understand what's happening in verse 12. Either the cares of the working man are fewer, so no matter what he eats well or not, he can still sleep in peace because he doesn't have to care about it a whole lot. But the rich man has too many cares that even a full stomach, which should give him a night's peace, doesn't. Or it could be considered this way. While the working man sleeps in peace with or without an empty stomach, the richness of the rich man's diet gives him constant indigestion, which results in insomnia. I mean, that's true, right? Either way, though, Solomon's pretty clear that instead of bringing peace of mind and satisfaction as it's supposed to, wealth actually disturbs your personal peace. Now, this absolutely could be connected to the previous verse. The greater your riches, the greater your problems of those who have them. But I tend to think that it's a dig at those who use their riches to outfit their tables like a feast day in and day out. I mean, think about it. You may not eat bountifully every day, but we all go after it on Thanksgiving Day, right? And we got a table full of food. And what happens to the typical American home after the Thanksgiving feast is consumed? We put on our stretchy pants, right? We uncomfortably waddle into the living room to catch the disasters that are Detroit and Dallas football. And frankly, we're going to nap most of the way through it anyway, right? We feel so uncomfortable and sick that we swear off food for a week, only to get back after it at Christmas, right? I mean, Solomon is saying that wealth causes the rich to eat like that day after day, and since they have no physical responsibilities that cause them to work off that kind of intake or balance it out, they can't sleep because they're constantly in physical discomfort. And instead of physical discomfort and satisfaction, wealth disturbs our peace through something as simple as the meals we eat. But Solomon's not done. He's given us 3. He's got a couple more. He's going to direct our attention to the fleeting nature of wealth. Wealth can easily disappear. And let's be honest here, the one thing that terrifies the person whose life is wrapped up in their wealth is that they're going to lose it. So what do? They hoard it. So when I was growing up, there was a cartoon TV series called DuckTales. And it featured an incredibly rich duck. It was a cartoon series, okay? His name was Scrooge McDuck, all right? And Scrooge went on all sorts of adventures with his nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. But the thing that always made me wonder at the show was Scrooge's vault. He had a massive skyscraper-style building with a giant money sign on it. And inside there were two things. His office, which I don't know what he did to have an office, but he had an office, and a massive warehouse that housed all of his gold. And in that warehouse, he had a diving board. And he would dive off his diving board into his mounds of gold and swim in it, like a swimming pool. And as a kid, I had two thoughts. One, I don't think gold works that way. And two, wouldn't it be better if he used that stuff somehow? See, Solomon would see Scrooge McDuck's vault as a grievous evil. It's gold that's hoarded by its owner to the harm of everyone else. Centuries before Adam Smith could posit that wealth in use is more than ownership of it, Solomon's arguing the exact same thing. It's not really useful for anyone, for all you to do is collect riches. How much cash you have on hand means nothing in the grand scheme of things. The number in your bank account is not an indicator of a good life. Why? Because as big as it is, it could be gone in a second. Forgive another quick trip down memory lane, but Scrooge McDuck can give us another example of this. Some of Scrooge's adventures took him into the realm of the fantastic. In 1990, Disney produced a DuckTales movie entitled Treasure of the Lost Lamp, in which Scrooge, Huey, Dewey, and Louie discover a magic lamp with a genie inside that grants wishes. A host of hijinks ensue, but the villain finally gets a hold of the lamp at one point and wishes to become richer than Scrooge. And in that moment, Scrooge, who mistakenly thinks he has the lamp, is enjoying his physics-defying swim in the vault of gold, only to have it begin to disappear magically around him. He desperately grabs at it, but within seconds, it's all gone. Scrooge is ruined. Now, by the end of the movie, Scrooge's riches are restored, but only after he's learned the value of friends and family over his wealth. It's a lesson he learns in like half the TV episodes of the show. He's not very good at learning it. Now, I know none of us are going to lose our gold through a genie and magic, okay? But just as quickly as Scrooge lost his fortune, we can lose ours. All it takes, Solomon says, is one bad investment, one poorly thought out business deal, one natural disaster, one crash of the stock market. Riches are as fleeting and insubstantial as the very wind, Solomon says, we keep trying to chase. And yet Solomon's still not done. The last piece of Solomon's deal with wealth is that it really is unable to change anything. It doesn't change anything. Nothing is different because of it. We're born with nothing. We die with nothing. And just like we don't have a say about when and how and to whom we're born, we don't have a say about when and how and where we die. And no amount of wealth changes that. No one, or the one who toils and strives and pulls himself up out of the slums and makes himself something, can't change the reality of his death. And the person who's born into a rich family and lives a life of ease and luxury from day one, he can't change his destiny either. No matter how much money you throw at it, death is coming for us all. I mean, do you see why Solomon would say, if these are all true, that if you spend your life pursuing wealth, you're going to live it in darkness and vexation and sickness and anger? It's no wonder. And just like everything other thing that Solomon has explored for some purpose or for meaning, riches mean nothing as well. At least so it would seem. But before we walk away with our heads down and our spirits deflated, Solomon wants to turn the story on its head. He's going to make the case that riches actually can be a good thing. They can bring purpose and meaning to life. In fact, he's going to say that riches are the means by which God makes us glad here under the sun. I mean, how is that possible? If everything he's talked about up to this point is that riches actually make us depressed and despairing under the sun, how could they possibly make us glad? Well, it's only possible, Solomon says, if we think of riches from a different perspective. Like everything else in Ecclesiastes, the thing itself is not evil. It's that we've made the thing into an ultimate thing, an end to itself. Instead of occupying ourselves with riches, riches become useful and meaningful when we're occupied with something else. And what is that? The gladness of God's goodness is the thing that should occupy our hearts. See, verse 18, 19, and 20, Solomon turns the whole thing on its head and he says this: "Here's what I've seen to be good and fitting. To eat, to drink and enjoy oneself in all one's labors in which he toils under the sun during the few years of this life which God has given him. For this is his reward. Further, as for the man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he's also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he will not often consider the years of his life because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart." See, Solomon turns back to the same thing he's turned back to a couple times now. In the midst of despair, remember, God has given us good gifts. He's given us good gifts. He's turned our attention to them: food and drink, work, family and friends. There's pleasant things to experience under the sun. But just as we've noted before, the pleasure that's in them isn't a final pleasure. They aren't good in and of themselves. They're good because they remind us of God's goodness and give us hints at the pleasures that are in store for us in eternity. See, frankly, Solomon is telling us if we invest too much effort and hope into the gifts apart from God, it won't be enough, and we're missing the point. You see, if we're attempting to be satisfied with something that's less than what we're meant for. Now, this illustration isn't going to work for everybody, so hang with me here, okay? I don't order kids' meals at restaurants for a reason. I mean, you don't get a body that looks like this by eating kids' meals, okay? I mean, if that's the case, if that's the case, there's something wrong with my desires. It's not that I'm desiring the wrong thing. It's not wrong to desire a kid's meal. I'm just letting myself be satisfied with a shadow of the thing, with a cheap, pale imitation of the thing. I wasn't made for Happy Meals. I was made for double quarter pounders with cheese. C.S. Lewis puts it this way. He says, "We're half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered to us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at sea. We are far too easily pleased." And by that, Lewis doesn't actually mean that we're pleased, because we're not. We tell ourselves we're pleased, but in fact, we're dissatisfied and empty. It's not because food and drink or family or friends or work are wrong things to desire. It's because we've lifted them to a level where they don't belong. They weren't meant for what we assigned them to. We were made for eternal pleasures. Solomon reminds us this back in chapter 3. He says God put eternity into our hearts. And anything we try to shove into that God-shaped hole in us, even good things like food and family and work, they won't fit. It's like trying to stretch a too small pizza dough into fill a too large pan. The dough's just going to get holes in it, and it won't make a good pizza. We've got to right-size the gifts that God has given us and put them in the right place. And here's what Solomon's saying. Wealth can be one of those gifts. Wealth can be one of them, as long as it's not for wealth's sake. That's why Solomon, after denouncing wealth, can say that wealth is a gift from God. I mean, these are the things that God has given man to give him purpose and meaning under the sun. And wealth accomplishes much, Solomon says. It provides food, not just for the one who owns the riches, but for the dependents as well. And I don't think Solomon's just talking about food here. I think he's using food as an example about what money can provide. The purpose of money is not to be hoarded like Scrooge McDuck, but to be used to provide for the needs of those around you. God has given you the money he has given you for you to use for the blessing and provision of others, for your family and those within your church. If he's blessed you with much, you should bless others with much. If he's blessed you with just enough to get by, then use what you can, even if it's sacrificial, to bless others. Solomon says not only does it provide, it's also a reward for hard work. Without the benefit of being paid, then what are we even working for? I mean, those who work hard should receive good benefit, and it's a blessing that the reward for work is not work itself. I mean, while at times it can be a wonderful reward, hard work produces satisfaction, a job well done, a good night's sleep, and more. It's nice to have a tangible reward that lets you know that others have seen your hard work. And also, riches give joy and happiness to life under the sun. You may have heard it said that money can't buy happiness, but you've probably also heard that money can buy ice cream, which is really close. And we laugh at that, but Solomon's kind of saying something like that here. He's saying that money, when it's used properly, provides for needs and blessing, and when that happens, happiness shows up. It may not buy happiness, but it does provide things that produce happiness. But that's only if it's used in the way that God intends it. You can't spend your life pursuing riches and think that the good things from riches will come. So the question has to be asked, how are we using our money? How are you using your money? I'm not asking how much you make. Solomon's clear on that. He doesn't have a particular sum in mind here. Now, listen, I understand that we live in a place with an incredibly high cost of living. I mean, last I checked, Denver is one of the top 10 most expensive areas to live in this nation. You add to that the incredible rise of cost of living as a whole across the nation the last couple of years. You got mortgages, you got car payments, you got groceries, you got kids, you got debt. You got to think about all those things when it comes to finances. But for some of you, if not many of you, you aren't wondering what to do with your riches. You're wondering how you're going to just keep your heads above water. But Solomon's instructions here aren't about how much you make or how much disposable income you have. He's asking a question about priority and value. Does how you use your money line up with God's priorities and values? Are you using your finances the way God has intended them to be? Author Randy Alcorn wrote a little book called The Treasure Principle. And in that book, by that name, Alcorn lays out 6 principles that will help us guide our thinking on whether or not we use our finances the way God intends them to. And these are his 6 principles. Very simply, God owns everything. We're simply money managers. And so, what we have is given to us by God, no matter how much or how little. And so my heart, my love, it's always going to follow. Since it's God's money, my heart's going to follow what I do with God's money, right? It means that the more I use my money for things that have eternal value, the more my heart's going to be drawn to things that have eternal value. And I'm going to be drawn that way, or I should be drawn that way, because heaven is my home, not this earth. And so I need to live for that reality, not this one. How I use my money should reflect what my true home is, not what my temporary home is. It's an investment there. And giving is the only antidote for this materialism. The only way to combat how I use my riches in a way that will lead to darkness is to give it away. It's not to hoard it or to spend it on myself. And here's the final principle. God prospers me not to raise my standard of living, but to raise my standard of giving. When God blesses financially, it's not so that you can go get the nicer car. It's so that you can help someone else in need. Just as Solomon points out here, there's nothing meaningful or satisfying to use my wealth as a means for advancing my own possession or prestige. The only way, that way is only folly and death. The more God blesses me with, the more I should be happy to give away. You should give to your family. So do you wisely use your money to provide for your family? Or is a lot of it wasted in retail therapy when you had a bad day at work? Or do you eat your funds away on food and snack that your body doesn't need? What about your church? When we talk about here about giving in a principled way to your church, is that your practice? Do you regularly set aside a portion of what God has blessed you with, however much or however little, to make sure God's ministry in the church is funded? It doesn't have to be a tithe. We don't preach that. If what you can do is 2% or 5%, then do it. Just make sure it's regular, systematic, and principled. Like you pay your rent or your mortgage or your car payment, faithfully and regularly give to your church, even if you don't have a lot. That's what God gave you the money for. But we don't just talk about principled giving, we talk about sacrificial giving as well. Do you want to truly experience the gladness that God can give you in this life? Then give away what you think you can't give away. Figure out a way to give just a little bit more. Or maybe, because of the economy at this moment, the rate that you've been principally giving before is now a rate that's sacrificial. Maybe you've considered dropping what to give because you're trying to make ends meet. Well, why don't you consider staying there? Staying at that rate you were giving, because it means you'll give sacrificially as well as provisionally. And see how God grants gladness and joy for this life under the sun, because you're willing to use the riches that God has given you the way that God says you should. These principles help us line up how to use our money here under the sun. When you choose to use the money that God has given you in the way that God intends, or whatever good gifts God has given you, you realize that life under the sun isn't actually as bad as it could be. Solomon says that you actually won't consider the years of your life. He's not talking about age. He's not talking about ignoring your birthday. He's talking about that you won't consider the difficulty and the experience of life under the sun as much. The toll that life takes will be blunted. It will be softened. How? How? By the gladness that God gives through his gifts. You see, no matter the gift, be it work or food or family or wealth, God's good gifts used in God's own way can bring gladness that fights the darkness of life under the sun. If you're going to approach those gifts as ends in and of themselves, wealth for wealth's sake, pleasure for pleasure's sake, food for food's sake, it's not going to satisfy. They're shadows of what's real. They're nothing but cheap knockoffs. They'll bring pleasure for a time, but ultimately they're going to prove empty. And you'll live your life in darkness with vexation and sickness and anger. But if you'll see them as good gifts from a merciful God and treat them as if they're meant to be, reminders of his goodness, reminders that there's a holiday at sea coming, then they'll bring with them gladness that turns our eyes from the darkness of life under the sun to the brightness of eternity with God forever. God's good gifts used in God's way can bring gladness that fights the darkness of life under the sun. Let's pray. Father, our hope is in you. It doesn't rest in political power. It doesn't rest in deep pockets. It rests wholly and solely on you through the work of Christ on the cross. So, Father, help us reorient and reschedule, reprioritize our lives. How we think about power, how we think about money, how we think about food and family and friends. To recognize the good gifts that you've given us. And to turn our hearts from this world to the next. To give us hope and joy and gladness in this life under the sun. Because we're submitting ourselves to you and how you would have us to live. We thank you that we have that hope in Christ. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.